Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back with the 130 something. I can never remember which it is, but it's 137th, I think, Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We have a full agenda today, as always. We're dealing first this time with environmental issues as well as electoral issues. And then in the second hour, we will be joined by the great Jeff Cohen, founder of the Fairness and Accuracy in Media. We'll have a full hour with Jeff, thanks to Mike Hirsch bringing him in. Thank you, Mike. Steve Caruso is our engineer. We're also with Wendy Siegel and Joel Siegel and Wendy Lederman. I guess I got you married. Joel Siegel is a founder of these calls, and Wendy's been a co-host, as well as MYLA RESON, the great MYLA RESON, who did something no one should ever have to do. She spent 5 hours yesterday dealing with issues of Pacifica radio governance. Oh my God. You know,
Five and a half, Harvey, 5.5.
5.5. I think I would prefer to have 5.5 root canals, actually, but there you go. So we're going to start with the great Kevin KAMPS, who's going to be talking to us about nuclear stuff. We're also going to be joined by SHAWNA FOSTER, who is remarkably articulate on issues of election and environmental protection. We have, Wendy, do we have the people on from Forest Defenders? We will talk.
I think they're going to try to hop on around 5:15 to be ready by.
Okay, good. We're going to talk about the horrific fight for the last forest left in Atlanta, Georgia. We have our normal visitation of Florida madness here. Wendy gives us the latest from the telling us what happened to Disneyland and God's waiting room there. We also want to talk, there are abortion referenda on the fast moving train here in both Florida and Ohio, extremely significant events which could in fact shape the coming of the 24 election. Also, I never thought I'd say this in a public meeting in the United States of America, but we're going to talk about revisiting the child labor laws. I mean, you got to be on some kind of nightmare bad acid trip to try and repeal the child labor laws, which date back to the early 1900s. But they are doing it, folks. I mean, we're going to see 4-year-old kids sorting coal once again. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. And also this stuff there, this radioactive material they want to put on the Florida roads. Wendy, I hope you'll get to that quickly. I see we're joined by Clint Curtis and by Alfred Meyer. Clint, good to see you in Florida. Alfred Meyer, good to have you back. Carl Grossman is with us, who has, I want to have Carl, if he can, he's missing from his chair right now, talk to us about the new anti-nuclear movement. Alfred Meyer, good to see you with us. And Ruth Strauss, always a pleasure to have you. So many other people, Lynn Feinerman, it's really great, Eric Lazarus. So we are rocking and rolling. We have 44 people with us to start. And I want to start with Kevin KAMPS. Kevin of the Beyond Nuclear, and as I say, and those of you listening in the second hour, if you're hearing us on Progressive Radio Network on Thursday night, we only go an hour on that, but then we have a second hour, which will be Jeff Cohen. And you are welcome to go to electionprotection2024.org and pick up the link, and you'll be listening to the whole second hour. Mike Hirsch has asked everyone to please stay muted, except for our talking guests. When you chime in, it's basically 90 seconds, which is plenty to say a lot. So that way we keep it going and we get through the hour, because we're always really packed. So Kevin, the Michigan boy wonder, you have incredible news as always from the nuclear power industry. What is the latest travesty that you'd like to fill us in on?
Well, I've got my No Holtec shirt on, if you can see that.
Yeah.
From New Mexico. And the big news of the week is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has licensed the construction and operation authorization for the Holtec dump in New Mexico. It's called a consolidated interim storage facility for highly radioactive waste. And it's a big one. It's up to 173,000 metric tons. So to give you an idea of how much that is, there's only about 90,000 plus metric tons of commercial spent nuclear fuel in the US right now. So apparently they're really planning ahead. They do have a small modular reactor design all their own that they'd like to build a lot of. And you have to wonder, and some of our expert witnesses have asked, do they plan to bring in other countries' high-level radioactive waste? Do they plan to bring in the militaries? So a lot of unanswered questions. And the good news is that on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, the state of New Mexico enacted a new law that said, no, thank you. It said no storage or disposal of high-level radioactive waste in our state without our explicit consent, which they're not giving right now. We'll have to stay vigilant forevermore because the governor before this one, a Republican, the current governor is a Democrat, was all for the dump. So unfortunately, and New Mexico has turned more and more Democrat as time has gone on, but that's no guarantee that it won't have a Republican governor or legislature in the future. So we'll just have to stay vigilant. This law in New Mexico kind of mirrors the one in Texas from 2021, which also was passed just before the NRC licensed a similar dump in Texas. So now we have two of these consolidated storage facilities on either side of the Texas-New Mexico border. It is a environmental justice violation of top order because this is, I mean, New Mexico is a majority minority state. The Latinx and indigenous population of New Mexico is the majority of that state. And that Latinx and indigenous population extends into Western Texas there. And of course, it's not consent-based. And these are talking points, consent-based siting and environmental justice that the Biden administration trot out there all the time. Only this is not that. And so how this can go down on Biden's watch, I mean, granted, the NRC likes to brag about its independence as an agency, but it is a majority of Biden Democrats on the 5-member commission, including the chairman. So we've still got some fight ahead beyond nuclear, and a bunch of allies are really focused on the legal opposition to both of these dumps. And now that New Mexico has been licensed, our federal appeals are going to take off like a rocket ship, go very quickly, probably now that we've been waiting for years to have our day in court. We're going to get it soon. We did lose in court on the Texas dump, incredibly, except for one circuit that's yet to rule, and that is the 5th in New Orleans, where the state of Texas and Fasken Land and Mineral, which is a oil and gas and ranching company, are opposing the dump down there. So we're waiting to hear how the court's going to rule on the Texas dump. And then we have multiple circuit courts about to be engaged on federal appeals on the New Mexico dump. There's action in Congress to authorize this. This is not legal under federal law. That's a part of our challenge. While there are members of Congress who want to make it legal at the behest of these dump companies and the nuclear industry writ large. And then they give money every year, and this is what I'll close on. The Department of Energy under Biden recognizes there is no consent in Texas and New Mexico. They won't talk about it very much or at all. So what they're doing is they're resurrecting a program from the 1980s called consent-based siting for federal consolidated interim storage as opposed to private, these two I've been talking about. And so guess who they're going to target like they did back in the 80s and 90s? Native American reservations would be at the top of that list. And we're talking about a dozen different targets they're about to announce later this month or next month. They're going to give $2 million a piece to each of the targeted communities as an enticement or a legalized bribe, just to start the process. More money to come if you enter deeper into the process. So just like it was all those decades ago, all of those dumps were stopped through the leadership of folks like Grace Thorpe and Winona LaDuke and Tom Goldtooth, Margene Bull Creek, Rufina Marie Laws, traditional Native Americans protecting the environment and people of their own communities back in the day. And here we go again, they're going to try again. So we have a lot of fight ahead of us on this stuff.
Well, I want to point out that Holtec is a New Jersey company, and they basically own Cory Booker. And so when you see the great liberal Cory Booker, remember that he's been a front man for Holtec. It's really a drag. MYLA RESON spent a lot of time in New Mexico, and this, of course, is the attempt in this great nuclear renaissance of the industry to claim that they have the waste problem solved. You know, the solution to the waste problem is to stick it on trucks and trains and ship it all the way to the country, across the country, to New Mexico or Texas or an indigenous reservation. Steve, our engineer, has put a picture of AOC up there, the great liberal hope, and she has put her foot in her mouth by being publicly quoted as saying that nuclear reprocessing works in France. And Kevin's wonderful colleague, a frequent guest, Linda Gunter, has written a great piece refuting the idea that nuclear recycling works at all anywhere, let alone in France. We're up to almost 60 people. We're joined by Kenny Bruno. Hi, Kenny. I'm going to send you, I just finished a new update of my People's Spiral of U.S. History. I'll be sending you it has a new conclusion, basically, which you'll like. I'll be sending it to you by PDF. And MYLA RESON, who has her hand up, has done a lot of campaigning, especially against Palo Verde in New Mexico. Go ahead, MYLA, please. Our co-host.
Palo Verde is in Arizona.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, New Mexico.
That's quite all right. But Kevin, I'd like to remind you that one dump that was not stopped was the so-called waste isolation pilot plant located very close to the Carlsbad National Caverns. And that's a dump for plutonium contaminated nuclear weapons waste. It was opened in 1999 and it failed 9,985 years ahead of schedule. Westinghouse and the Department of Energy claimed that they could isolate the waste from the accessible environment for 10,000 years. But after 15 years on Valentine's Day, there was an explosion underground and it blew plutonium up into the accessible environment. The extent of the contamination was never measured, but we know that a number of workers were tested and tested positive for internal plutonium contamination. And the dump was closed for a few years, but it's open again, and it's receiving plutonium contaminated nuclear weapons waste from various nuclear weapons facilities around the country, from Los Alamos National Labs and from Oak Ridge and Lawrence Livermore Labs and the other nuclear weapons facilities around the United States. So that's unfortunate. And exactly how close is this proposed high-level waste facility? And by the way, let me just add that dump opened when Bill Clinton was president, and Bill Richardson, the former governor of the state of New Mexico, was at that time the Secretary of Energy. So it was the Libertarian candidate for president was the governor of New Mexico at the time. I'm trying to remember his name.
Gary Johnson.
Gary Johnson, the pot smoking Gary Johnson it was a bipartisan effort to shaft New Mexico.
Yeah, and it's amazing. They had a barrel. They were working with barrels of waste, and they were putting in the equivalent of kitty litter. That's a myth. Material. That's a myth, Harvey. They never determined what the cause of the accident was, so they made up a story. Oh, okay.
They could proceed. The kitty litter story, there's no evidence to support that. It was just that they wanted to be able to explain why the accident occurred, and so they just decided that they had to say something. But the man who advanced that kitty litter explanation is he's just a fabulist for
Oh, okay.
nuclear industry.
Well, leave it to the nuclear industry to blame their problem on cats. Okay, Ruth Strauss, and then we'll.
Could I just,
come back
to answer Myla's question
last-
real quick, the waste isolation pilot plant is just 16 miles, 16 miles from the Holtec site. And it's why the Holtec site is where it is, and it's why the Texas dump is where it is, and it's why Uranium Enrichment Corporation in Eunice, New Mexico is where it is. This is Pete Domenech's nuclear corridor that he envisioned putting through Texas and New Mexico. And why is WIP where it is? Because Los Alamos is where it is. So the nuclear industry has had its claws into New Mexico since 1943. And they're the biggest employer in the state, just at Los Alamos and Sandia. So they have tremendous political power, economic power, and it's being exploited right now.
Boy, it's really ugly. And of course, the Biden administration is all hands on deck for this, just like they're supporting the so-called nuclear renaissance, which we'll talk about in a minute. Ruth Strauss has a hand, please. Ruth, 90 seconds.
Okay.
Ruth, are you unmuted? Let's see. Okay. Ruth Strauss, go ahead. Go ahead, Ruth.
That was a jaw-dropping presentation. That business about the 173 metric tons. I mean, it's beyond my capacity to imagine. What I'd like the storage tanks to be outside Greg Abbott's house, as well as I think it's the Fifth Circuit there in Texas, because they had a brownout, or they lost their energy a couple of years ago. But anyway, kidding aside, what can we do?
Kevin, what can we do?
One thing right now is contact both of your US senators and your US representative and urge them to stop wasting money at the Department of Energy on this consolidated storage scheme, because it makes no sense. If it's temporary, that means it's going to double transportation risks, first to the temporary dump and then to a permanent dump somewhere we don't know where, someday we don't know when. So that makes no sense. But a bigger danger than that even is that it's just going to stay at the temporary dump permanently at the surface, and the containers will eventually fail and leak their contents into the environment. So these temporary dumps are a non-starter, and Congress needs to hear from constituents to stop wasting money. They're about to waste, like I said, I think it's $26 million on 13 of these sites. They're going to announce it in the next several weeks. So they're going to keep spending that kind of money year after year until we stop them.
Unbelievable. Wendi Lederman, you have a hand, Wendi?
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Always. Well, I want to say great to hear from you, but it's never really great news. So a celebration. So I'm trying to find an article and I can't find it. That's what's really peculiar right now. Is a couple of weeks ago I came across some Miami Waterkeeper stuff that was saying that Turkey Point was leaking into to Biscayne Bay and possibly threatening the aquifer, which like all of South Florida gets their water from. And now I can't find anything on it. Like I had an article I was actually meant to send you, and it's just really weird. So I don't know if you've heard anything about it. Thank you.
I have heard about it over the years. Turkey Point has a strange cooling system where they've actually dug canals in the coral reef, the above ground coral reef that's there. And so it's not exactly watertight. And so this cooling water contains all kinds of stuff, from toxic chemicals to solvents to some radioactivity. And as it leaks into the groundwater and into Biscayne Bay, that's problematic. So that's another aspect of nuclear power, are these so-called routine releases of radioactivity and other toxins. And even just the thermal wastewater impact on the ecology is tremendous. What they're trying to do there is save money by not building cooling towers. And so they've built these canal systems at Turkey Point, which is pretty unique in a very fragile ecosystem. And they've gotten away with it for decades, and they'd like to keep going for decades more.
I'd like to point out to Wendi and everybody in Florida that Turkey Point in 1991, Hurricane Andrew, which was a big one, went right over Turkey Point. I mean, literally, the eye of the hurricane went directly over the domes at Turkey Point. And we raised the issue. I went down with Greenpeace and we raised the issue all nuclear plants are allegedly supposed to have evacuation plans, and we questioned FEMA, how do you evacuate a nuclear plant in the middle of a hurricane? And they didn't have an answer. And then this is the only a moment in my career where I almost witnessed a murder. The FEMA guy, they had a press conference in Turkey Point. It's the only nuclear plant that was licensed to operate that I've ever been in. And we went into Turkey Point and they had a press conference, and the FEMA guy was asked, who gave you permission to allow this reactor to reopen? And he stood up there and just yabbered away, a classic non-answer. And my friend, Joette Lorian, who is even smaller than Wendy, literally was going to wring this guy's neck. I mean, we had to restrain her from choking the guy, which he deserved. But nonetheless, they reopened Turkey Point. Should never have reopened, and it shouldn't have been built in the first place. And there it is. Wendy, you had another radioactive issue to raise. We want to put in this section here about what they want to put on the roads in Florida. And we're up to almost 70 people, and you are not going to believe. I never cease to amaze at the irresponsibility of our so-called elected officials. Can you tell people what they want to put on the roads now in Florida?
Not just on the roads, but in the roads. And this is pretty crazy. And I do want to welcome. We have Micah on the call. He did dial in from an important meeting, a city council meeting in Atlanta. So hopefully we'll have I'll try to be quick. So
okay.
So being here. So phosphogypsum is the radioactive byproduct that occurs when you convert phosphate that's mined, and apparently Florida is like the largest producer of phosphate and phosphoric acid. Like 80% of the world gets it from Florida, and it's just strange that it's not more widely known if it's such a contributor to our economy, or if it is. But they use it for fertilizer generally. And the way you go from phosphate to phosphoric acid is you add sulfuric acid. And when you do that, it releases the stored bits of uranium and there's I think plutonium. There's some radioactive elements, but then when you make the fertilizer, it concentrates. And the byproduct is called phosphogypsum, and that's what you see there. And that's where this radioactive stuff goes. But then when you're using the phosphate, that they want to use it as aggregate to build roads, to mix it in with all the other stuff that they build roads with, that the phosphate there turns into radon. That's the next step. And so that off gases. And like, can you just imagine like neighborhood streets and like children are playing, like what kind of dystopian cartoon, but reality that they're trying to make this just in order to prop up the fertilizer industry, which, I mean, honestly, like we know so many other things from regenerative agriculture. We're about to get hit with this huge plume of seaweed, and they actually can compost that and make fertilizer, but they're closing all the plants in order to sell it off in P3s, which is, I digress, but there's alternatives to phosphate. And I know phosphate is also used in weapons of war. So it's just really silly that we're doing these things, and the EPA doesn't allow it, but they allow studies of it. So this is going to be a kind of a long-term thing. The bill is to allow studies of the usage of it. But even if they were to pass it, they would need a case-by-case approval from the EPA. But I mean, it just doesn't even, it's mind-boggling to think that this is actually, it passed. They're waiting for DeSantis to sign it right now. So just that's the quick version of something I can go much further into, and seeing apparently the FHA, the Highway Administration, also uses other industrial byproduct aggregates, which I'm looking more into. But yeah, they want to lane our streets with radioactive. Mike Hirsch has been calling the road to cancer. Thanks.
Oh my God. Who could make this up? I do want to, while we're on things radioactive, then we're going to talk to the forest defenders, Wendy, in a minute. But I want to call on our great buddy, Carl Grossman. Carl, I believe I read a review of yours in Counterpunch of this new film, which I've seen, A Women of 3 Mile Island. Could you talk to us very quickly about that and tell people about the movie, because it's certainly a film that everybody who's concerned about nuclear issues, including Anna Georgi, who's with us from Western Mass, you should see. Can you tell us about this movie, Carl?
Yeah, can you? I'm not muted now, I think.
You're good. You're good. There it is. There's your article.
It's a very important film. It's titled Radioactive: The Women of 3 Mile Island. And Heidi Huttner, who's a friend of mine, and she's a professor at a neighboring SUNY college, SUNY Stony Brook. And she has, I mean, in that review, I call it a masterpiece. And it is. It's received all kind of awards already. It's see it as soon as you can, wherever it's being shown. In fact, it'll be shown in California, where you are, in about a month and a half.
Right.
Very important. The other thing, let me mention as we go through this nightmare, a continuing nightmare, and I mentioned this on an earlier call, is this incredible book just out by, speaking of California, Mark Jacobson, No Miracles Needed, How Today's Technology Can Save Our Climate and Clean Our Air. And I just did a TV show with Mark. It'll air nationally this weekend on Free Speech TV. It's also up on YouTube before it'll be on Free Speech TV. You can watch it on YouTube, and I can put on the chat the link to the interview I do with Jacobson, where he stresses that existing technologies can provide all the energy we need. No need for nuclear power, for sure, and carbon capture and all this other junk. I mean, this is the other side of the coin. Beyond the horror, the lethal horror, the deadly horror of nuclear power is a path, and Mark has been involved in my state creating a whole renewable energy program for the state of New York. He's been quite active. He's up there in Stanford, and I will link on the chat the YouTube half-hour interview with Mark, and then again, Radioactive, what compelling interviews with cancer being widespread in the area of 3 Mile Island. Excuse me. Chromosomal research now being done, very important research, which will just refute completely the claim of the industry that no one died as a result of the 3 Mile Island disaster.
Well, the two biggest lies ever told in industrial American history were, number one, that nuclear power will be too cheap to meter, and number two, that nobody died at 3 Mile Island. And I went into central Pennsylvania in January of 1980 and interviewed a lot of the women who are in this movie, Radioactive, the women at 3 Mile Island. And I'm actually in the movie, but I'm on the cutting room floor. So I was interviewed. I didn't make the cut. But, I interviewed people while the national media was saying that nobody was harmed there, and it's a total lie. Radiation went all over. They don't know where it went. They don't know how much got out. They don't know who got hit. But these 4 women who are featured in this film, it's devastating, and everybody should see it. And Carl, if you'll do the favor of getting Mark Jacobson to come on our show with you, I'd like to have him on at a future time. He's really an important guy.
That would be good. I mean, here's the green path, the truly green path. And Mark, in this new book, he had an earlier book 3 years ago, more of a textbook. This book, anybody can understand how deadly, expensive, and so forth, nuclear, and unnecessary, completely unnecessary.
Well, Mark has shown definitively that we have the technology to go 100% renewable. Mm-hmm. And, he's right there with Amory Lovins, and we want to have him on. And you've been doing Enviro video for God knows how long, since the invention of television, I think. And so your video will be greatly worth watching as well. So thank you for that, both of you. Does anyone else want to chime in? Alfred Meyer, anybody on radioactive issues before we jump into the forest here? We also have been joined by John Steiner. John, it's good to see you, as always. Hearing none, I want to switch quickly to the cops fight, the Atlanta fight. Wendy, can you introduce our guest from the Forest Defenders and tell us what's going on, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy and appreciative to invite Micah here. His last name is Herskine. So excuse me, he's dialing in from a really important top city council meeting that's going on there. If anyone heard me a couple weeks ago talking about the funding behind it's going to be funded 30% through the public police funds, but then they need another 60 million from that private corporation entity that's a nonprofit. It's called the Police Foundation, but it's actually a bunch of corporations that can donate money to the police. And the city council was telling everybody that they're not going to have a vote to approve this. And then some emails were leaked that revealed actually they are going to have the power to approve it or disapprove it. And without that vote, then the other 60 million won't come through. So Mike is at that meeting now.
This is the destruction of the forest in Fulton County, where Atlanta is in Georgia, right? Is it in Fulton County?
So it's actually in DeKalb County.
It's in DeKalb County.
Can
And
people hear me with-
they're cutting down this forest to build a training center for police. Is that correct?
That's right. So this is 381 acres of forest land. It's actually outside of Atlanta city limits, but it is owned by the city. Oh, I just lost my screen. Can people see me?
Go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so it's city-owned land outside of city limits, 381 acres. The original plan was to give all of this land to the city council or to the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is this private nonprofit entity, that would destroy it and turn it into this cop city. After a bunch of movement in the summer of 2021, they said, oh, well, we're only going to do 85 acres and the rest is going to become parks and trails and community space. And, that's not binding in the lease language anywhere. So, we're going with it's 381 acres. That's what you're signing over to the police foundation. We don't trust you as far as we can throw you. But yeah, the grand arc of the movement is that this has been going on for about 2 years. The plans were first proposed in early 2021. And again, the plan is to build this $90 million police training facility on the forest land, and to have that basically paid for by 60 million in private funding and 30 million in public funding. This is in a majority Black neighborhood in the southeast metro Atlanta area. And people have been fighting it now for 2 years. Back in September 2021, when they approved the facility or the lease of the land to this police foundation, there were 17 hours of public comment, the vast majority of which was opposed to the project, and they voted it through anyway. And that pattern has continued as the resistance has escalated, the repression has escalated. So there have now been 42 domestic terrorism arrests, people who have been charged with domestic terrorism, which carries a penalty of 5 to 35 years in prison just for their perceived involvement or support of the Stop Cop City movement. A forest defender has been murdered in cold blood, assassinated by a firing squad with 57 bullet wounds to their body. When the autopsy showed that most likely they were killed with their hands raised like this, and there were bullet wounds through their hands. This person's name was Tortuguita. And so, yeah, it's a really intense time where I am right now. Sorry to be a little bit chaotic. Hopefully there's not too much background noise. As I'm at City Hall, there is, like I said, they are trying to do $60 million of private funding, $30 million of public funding. They've already upped that ask now to $33.5 million of public funding, and the city council will have to vote on that. And so the legislation isn't going to be voted on today here, but we know that, long before they walk into the room when there's a vote, they've already made up their minds. And so we're here weeks before there's going to be a vote to say, no cop city. It was this incredible moment this morning where there were hundreds of people lining this entire area, going out, around, and down these stairs and outside of the building. There's about 9 hours of people signed up for public comment so far. About 100 more were denied the opportunity to sign up for public comment because they said that they had to cut it off. And, of course, that's not the line when they take when they want people to stay in line to vote, but it is the line they take when they want people to stay, when they don't want people to stay in line to give public comment. And so anyway, 9 hours of public comment is what we're looking at. It's a really exciting time in terms of our ability to stop Cop City. It's the first time that we've been in person to tell them this, because back in 2021, it was all still virtual because of COVID. And obviously they've seen us in person at other times, but this is the first really big, enormous movement time at City Hall. That's a lot of information in a short time. I don't know, Wendy, I'm happy to answer questions, happy to do whatever.
Does anyone want to ask a question about this incredible fight here at Cop City in Atlanta? It's a very big deal. And Micah, we're really glad to have an on the ground report. Thank you so much. Wendy, you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a couple things to ask Micah, if that's okay, because I know you're at the meeting now, which, I mean, again, like the whole, like, there seems to be almost like an active cover up. You mentioned Tortuguita's murder, and
Yep.
I know that that they're just not talking about this, and all of a sudden now the police or the city council was like making their own propaganda in a sense. So I'm curious, like the public reaction to things, and also, if I'm not sure if everyone understands that it's like a mock city that they're building to
Right.
suppress urban warfare, and now you have these protesters, like people, and sorry to diverge, but I was hoping to hear from you on some of these things. Some of the protesters were going around, not even getting out of their car, but just putting flyers on mailboxes, not even inside the mailboxes, just identifying who the cops were that are allegedly shot Tortuguita, and they face 20 to 30 years in prison just for handing out these flyers. So I hope that just to hear a little bit about like who you are and what brought you to Cop City and what it, or brought you to Weelani, and what it's been like there for you. So sorry for that's a bombardment, but we're just so happy to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so a couple things. Yes, first, really important to note, the reason this was branded early on by organizers as Cop City is because the plans literally include plans for different mock city buildings. So like a parking lot, a gas station, I think a school, they've said that they're scaling down some of those plans. But the point is, in the wake of the 2020 uprisings, they saw shit burn, they saw windows get smashed, they saw police cars go up in flames. And, they're like, we need to have the capacity and training to suppress uprisings. And of course, these uprisings result from the relentless violence of racial capitalism. And so, that is the mock city. In terms of who I am, I'm an organizer based here in Atlanta. Please don't swear, I'm sorry. I'm an organizer here in Atlanta. I work for a nonprofit, although I'm not representing them on this call. Sorry, just saw some people. And we've been organizing around this, like I said, for 2 years now. I come to this sort of from an abolitionist lens. The belief that police do not make people safer, and in fact, police cause a lot of violence and harm. And the fact that in a city like Atlanta, where we give a third of our police budget, a third of our city budget to police, and yet still so many people don't feel safe, and people don't have safe housing, and people don't have equal funding for their schools, and we don't have roads that are paved. Our police as public safety strategy is not working. And so, I come to it from that abolitionist lens of saying, what do people actually need to be safe and to be well and to be whole? And what we're doing right now is not that.
Okay.
Wendy, I'm trying to remember what else you said.
Well, that's good. That's good. MYLA has a hand, and then we're going to keep moving. But that's an amazing report. If you'll put contacts and the organization and news in the chat for all this, that's really great. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So thank you for that. MYLA, you have a question, MYLA?
Yes, I do. Micah, could you remind us, how long has this public comment been going on about how many people have spoken and how many people will speak and how many people will be refused the opportunity to speak?
So numbers aren't super clear yet. I'm sure we'll know in the coming days, but I think about 250 people are signed up to speak for about 9 hours of public comment total. And what I heard is that there were at least about 100 people outside of City Hall, outside of the room, who were denied the ability to sign up. Okay, 282 total signed up.
Okay.
Yeah, and,
I'm
and let me
sure-
just say that is a record. You know, I've talked to journalists who have been covering, you know, City Hall for a long time, and I've heard multiple of them say they have never seen anything like this. Even a city council member who was inside nodded in agreement when a public commenter said, you know, that they had never seen an issue where there was not even one person on the other side. So far, every single person has been against Cop City. No one has spoken in favor of it.
Well, good for you. Good for you. And thank you for that. Put your contacts in and come back next week and give us an update if you would. We'd appreciate
Great,
it.
thanks.
And by the way, we are not going to meet on Memorial Day. That's keeping with our tradition of not having meetings on holidays. We don't want to impose on your time. Most holidays seem to come on Monday, so that would be May 28th, I believe, is Memorial Day, or May 29th. I'm not sure which. It's a Monday. That's 2 weeks from today. We will not meet. So just go out and enjoy your family. Please. Is there anyone else want to comment on this before we move on very quickly?
Just that-
Jeffrey, I'll give you very quickly a moment, and then we're gonna move to SHAWNA Foster. And I want to ask, I know you were with us last week, Alfred Meyer, if there's anything you want to chime in today as a follow-up to our discussions last week, that would be great. We go ahead, Jeffrey, please.
Jeffrey's dropped out. He's trying to get back into the
He's
room.
coming back with us. Well, let's jump over to SHAWNA Foster. SHAWNA, if you can give us a quick update. And Quint Curtis, you rarely join us if there's something specific you want to share with us from Florida. I think what actually all that phosphate stuff, what's going to happen is that Ron DeSantis is going to load it into a big troop plane, and he's going to fly over Disney World and cover Disney World with all that glyphosate or whatever it is. That would be in character for him. SHAWNA Foster, do you want to give us a quick update on your work? And then we'll check in with Clint Curtis and Alfred Meyer, please. But go ahead, SHAWNA. I can't believe I called Alfred Hoffman. Anybody who knows who Alfred Hoffman, you can put it in the chat. Okay, SHAWNA Foster.
Yeah, it was a great conversation we had last week with Greg Palast about election suppression and voting suppression and what you can do about it. And I hope everybody is inspired to join a local election protection organization near them, such as the NAACP, to be able to educate folks on their rights. Election Defenders is also a program that will be coming up in 2024, again, to make sure that an additional layer of training to getting people's legal rights is to also make sure that people are free from intimidation and harassment at their voting locations. It's a terrorist campaign that white militia groups run targeting voting centers. And so making sure that people know that there's going to be a lot of people watching and at those voting centers so that they are free from intimidation or harassment, which is against the federal law. And a lot of these militants were arrested and prosecuted. The two ones in Arizona during 2022 who were faced down by a grandma, if you all remember that national news story. This is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with where it sounds really scary, but if grandma can fend them off, so can you, right? Like we just need to not let the fear get to us about these voting locations, especially when they're targeting voting locations in majority brown and black neighborhoods where people have fought for civil rights for decades and decades and decades. But what Greg Palast is doing is really effective on the legal side by re-enfranchising tens of thousands of voters and watching when the rolls get de-enfranchised. But that's really legalistic, and it's very hard for the average person to get into those kinds of things. So that's where you joining the NAACP or another election protection organization like Common Cause or Election Defenders really helps the on-the-ground community bake sale sort of feeling when it comes to voting day in 2024. So just wanted to give a little preview about Election Defenders and what it means when we're going to be dealing with more of this in 2024, intimidation and harassment at the polling locations.
All right, so SHAWNA, put your contacts in the chat, please.
Sure.
And make sure that you continue to join us. Does anyone want to ask anything of SHAWNA? She's a great presenter and a great organizer. And we're going to move on. Okay, thank you, Shauna, for that. Thank you very much. I want to go to Alfred Meyer. Alfred, you were on last week. Is there anything you'd like particularly to contribute now? Let's get you unmuted. There we go.
Yes, I just have a couple of little things to add. I've been looking into the promotional efforts of small modular reactors.
Oh, God.
Came across a rather interesting document dated January 12th, 2021, written by none other, or at least signed by, Donald J. Trump.
Oh, my God.
And the title of it is Executive Order on Promoting Small Modular Reactors for National Defense and Space Exploration. So the guy who hardly ever tells the truth, I would argue, is telling us some truth here. The discouraging part is how when the Biden administration came into power, they immediately continued promoting small modular reactors, and we're through the State Department. There's something called the Foundational Infrastructure for Responsible Use of Small Modular Reactor Technology, otherwise the FIRST program. And we've given $5.3 million. Anyway, there's just the small modular reactors, I've concluded, are the sales pitch for the nuclear enterprise today. And this being pitched as we're going to swap out your dirty old coal plant and put in this clean modular small reactor. At the same time, IAEA has a small modular reactor working group with something like 33 countries in it, and another 21 countries as observer countries. So this is a huge, international industrial push.
Well, let's look at the reality here. Do they even have a prototype for a small reactor?
No, these are PowerPoint reactors, Harvey. They exist on paper.
I like that.
So I also will note that the National Academy of Sciences came out last week with a report, long report, including Alison McFarland as one of the authors.
I saw that.
And they're saying that small modular reactors won't contribute to the grid at all until the 2030s sometime. They might
sometime in the 2030s.
So they're honest about, my quip is that things are getting so tough for the civilian nuclear power industry that they're having to resort to telling the truth.
Boy, we're in trouble when they do that.
Yeah. So, but that's the field I've been toiling in of late.
Well, that's truly amazing. I'm calling John Rosenthal. John, if you want to join us now on our Zoom call, we can do that. Thank you. Can you send me by email and also put in the chat the links to that report? Because here's the reality of the nuclear.
It's not which are you asking, the National Academy of Sciences report, or are you
both,
asking
both of them? I want the citation where they admit that they can't be online till the 2030s.
Oh, that's a big report, the National Academy of Sciences report that came out last week.
Okay, great. All right. So here's the reality of the nuclear renaissance, folks. They have a generation of big reactors, right? Big light water reactors, 1,000 megawatts or more. And the last 8, count them, 8 big light water reactors have become major economic catastrophes. There's one in Finland, Olkiluoto, one in France, Flamanville, 2 in England, Hinkley, 2 at South Carolina at Summer, which were canceled at a cost of $10 billion, and 2 at Volta, which just came on at $34 billion 7 years late. So if you look at the last 8 big reactors, that generation of reactors is not going to fly. There aren't any under construction, not the United States. There'll never be another one under construction. So this nuclear renaissance, they're talking about small reactors, which don't exist. So the whole nuclear renaissance is a kabuki show. There's no there. There's nothing. It's ridiculous.
It's
Right? Am I right?
It's a sales pitch. It's to win public acceptance. You know, hey, I'm going to get an SMR in my neighborhood, and I'm going to have clean energy soon. And it's so that when I hear when I hear nuclear stuff, that sounds good. That's going to benefit me. And when in fact, it has nothing to do with clean energy or any of that. It's all about nuclear weapons and the nuclear navies.
Yeah, and the real danger, what makes this so dangerous, is that the inclination and the implication of what they're saying here is that they should keep the old reactors operating. That's, as nobody knows better than Ron Leonard or Kevin KAMPS or Anna Georgi, these old reactors are terrifying. They're an average age of 40 years old. Anybody raise your hand on the call if you're driving a 40-year-old car. I mean, and so the incredible danger here is not that they're going to build more old reactors. They're not going to do that. Not going to happen. The new reactors are totally in the distance, and it's all about keeping the old reactors open, the ones that are online, including Diablo Canyon, which is surrounded by earthquake faults, and Davis-Besse, which is literally falling down along with Seabrook and all these other old reactors. That's the terror here. Would you agree with that, Alfred?
I'm sorry, I missed the question there.
Keeping the old reactors open, it's a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, well, I often use that example. How often would you take the family and load him into a 1974 station wagon?
A Corvair.
And go driving down the road at 75 miles an hour because, of course, a
Corvair or a Pinto, right?
Your choice where you want the gas tank. But it's
terrifying. And they got nowhere to go. There's not going to be any new old reactors.
They have to keep pushing the whole nuclear dream, the whole fantasy that this is our future. But at the meanwhile, this is a huge industrial, international infrastructure. And that's what we're playing with. And it's like with Bill Gates's problems out in Wyoming with TerraPower is he needs his high assay, low enriched uranium. The only place to buy that these days is Russia.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But that is led, and there's, if you read the governmental publications, there's a huge push to reestablish the entire uranium fuel chain domestically.
Yeah, it's.
Harvey, you got muted. You're muted, Harvey.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just asked John Rosenthal to join us with the Monday mass murder report. So if he can find the link, come on and join us, John. Okay. Okay, Ron Leonard, please go ahead. I'm going to unmute you. And then Shauna, you have a hand again.
So I've solved the problem of nuclear reactors. What we're going to do is give them a classic car plate, just like we give the old cars, and then they'll get a discount on their insurance. They'll be fine. They'll be great. So if you look in the links, you'll notice that Dow Chemical, our friendly Dow Chemical company, has now committed to buy at least 4 of these new classic mini nuclear power plants. And Westinghouse, our friendly Westinghouse, who really has done a great job in building nuclear power plants so far, if you like broken things, has now put out a beautiful 3D CAD drawing of their spanking new miniature nuclear power plant, and they'll give you a great price on that plant, I can guarantee.
And when can these come online? When physically, if everything goes flashy, which we don't want, when could conceivably the first new reactor come online?
Well, they all say 2030, but it's really actually 2035 before they even get through the regulatory barriers that there are in existence. And then who's going to be the first one to put one in? Is it going to be Bill Gates in the town that he bought? Is it going to be the U.S. Army? Because they want to put them in also. It's a toss-up. The situation is it's the most expensive power on the earth. And by the way, it's really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, but it's also the problem is that no old reactors are going to be built of the old kind. The new ones aren't going to come on till the 2030s. So in between, they're going to push and push and push on these the ones that are licensed until one of them is going to blow up. I mean, we know that's going to happen. Carl Grossman has been aware of that. Anna Georgie, everybody. Do we have John Rosenthal on the line yet? I'll call on Shauna and then Wendy. And then we'll go to John Rosenthal for our first Monday mass murder report. So I don't see John with us. Shauna, go ahead, please, and then Wendy.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a quick financial update report. And one way that you can move against these climate or the radioactive folks is through banks, right? And so that's like what we've done at Rainforest Action Network is we look at all lending that banks have given to fossil fuel companies, which was $669 billion last year. So if you want to know how much your bank or your pension fund or your investments are going to these projects that you're against, you can find out at www.bankingonclimatechaos.org. And you can find out anything you wanted to know about any fossil fuel company, any of these, and what banks are supporting them instead of making them transition to a community-centered, renewable, just transition that we all need instead. The other thing I wanted to say is that it is AGM season right now, annual general meetings that shareholders. So if you're a shareholder at like Chase Bank or Chubb Insurance that is insuring or underwriting these projects, there are resolutions that all of them are facing to say that they've got to stop supporting these projects. And so you can find out more information on insurance companies at www.insureourfuture.org. And you can find more information about how to join the shareholder season and activism there at www.stopthemoneypipeline.org. So if you look at any of those websites, you'll be able to learn how the financial industry is supporting these fossil fuels or these non-renewable energies that we do not want. And you can get involved there. Chubb shareholder meeting is tomorrow, and they're facing 2 resolutions that would cause them to stop ensuring expansion of fossil fuels and dirty energy. And you can sign up to be one of the folks to say that you don't want Chubb to do this. They were the first insurer in the United States to actually have a policy on some oil and gas insurance. So Chubb especially is movable, whereas most of the insurance industry in the United States is just fine insuring any gas and oil or fossil fuel project or energy project that is harmful to the community. So we can really lean on these insurers and banks to adopt these exclusion policies, which would help and tell them that where we want them to invest this money instead. So those are the 3 websites, bankingonclimatechaos.org, stopthemoneypipeline.org, and insureourfuture.org, that if you want to make sure that your financial portfolio reflects your values, we've got lots of tools for you to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're joined, Wendy, if I can put you on hold for a sec. We're joined by the great John Rosenthal in Boston, and I see Jeff Cohen is with us. Jeff, it's good to have you. For those of you listening on the Progressive Radio Network, we're near the end of the first hour of our Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Zoom call. And if you want to hear the second hour, which is going to have Jeff Cohen, featured the great Jeff Cohen, go to electionprotection2024.org, and we'll post the link there. And you can hear the second hour and hear Jeff Cohen. Dave Saltman, it's good to see you. John Rosenthal, are you with us there, John? Can we
I am
unmute
finally
you?
here.
Fantastic. Good for you. You're in Boston. I do want to tell you, I was in Fenway Park with my 2 grandsons last week, and I sat where I sat with my grandfather in 1959, and my grandson said it was the best experience of his life. It would have been better if you were with us, but you are now. John Rosenthal is a great leader in the gun control movement. I talked to him about doing a Monday report, just updating us on the latest mass murders, because they tend to, you read 5-10 people are shot, and then the next day another 5-10 people are shot, and it's just like whatever. So John, can you give us an update, please?
Sure. Just for a little context, I'm a business person in Boston, gun owner. I've been a gun owner my whole adult life. I skeet shoot, and I've been the leader of the gun violence prevention effort here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're an urban state, and we have the lowest gun death rate in the nation. We have the most effective gun laws and the lowest gun death rate in the nation. Hold on one sec. Hey, Hito. Sorry. Harvey, a mutual friend of ours, Hito Coleman, is visiting, and his
Oh my
dog
God.
is scratching at the door.
All right, have him come in, but go ahead. Tell us about the week in gun violence.
So yeah, for the last 3 years, there's been a mass shooting of 4 more people every single day in America. We've reached.
Will you repeat that? Will you repeat that sentence?
Sure. For the last 3 years, there has been a mass shooting of 4 or more human beings in America every single day.
Jeez.
And what we've reached a new low this year in 2023. Not only have there been more mass shootings than days of the year so far, there has been 1 school shooting every single day.
Oh, God.
Every 30 minutes, a kid under 20 years old is shot. Every 3 hours, a kid under 20 years old is killed. Today, 130 Americans who woke up will be dead from gun violence, and 200 or more will be injured. We have seen, these high-profile mass shootings for now a number of years, but never lose sight of the fact that Congress, the majority in Congress, do not care. There was a mass shooting in Las Vegas where 441 people were shot, 58 killed. Congress didn't even notice. So, we have more gun violence in America than all 26 industrialized nations combined, largely because we don't regulate firearms like we regulate toy guns. And we have no licensing requirement for owning a firearm. In 32 states, there's no background check requirement. I'm sorry, there's no licensing requirement other than a few states like Massachusetts. There's no background check requirement to buy as many easily concealed handguns or military assault weapons as you want in 32 states. We have gun violence by design in order to increase fear, increase gun violence, and increase gun sales. I've hunted. I skeet shoot. I've hunted. I mean, you hunt anywhere in America, you have to get a hunting license, and the NRA has no problem with that. The Republicans in Congress have no problem with that. And when you hunt deer, you're limited to 5 rounds, and when you hunt duck, you're limited to 3 rounds to protect the duck and deer population. But when you want to hunt humans, no license, no limit on the number of rounds.
John, I'm gonna. There's a guy on the call that you should meet. He's about to present. I'd like you to come back next week and continue this, because I want to have questions, but I want to make this a more common. And if you can bring David Hogg and Hito Coleman with you, that would be great.
Well, let me just, I don't know if I can make it next week, but let me just tell you, there's 10 to 20 members of Congress who are holding up the will of 200 million Americans. 80% of Americans polled, even according to Fox, want universal background checks for all gun sales. 60%, 65% want a ban on military style assault weapons. It's 10 to 15 members of Congress that are holding it up. So if anyone wants to get involved, call Chuck Schumer and call your senator. They need to take a vote on banning assault weapons. Regardless of whether the House is going to do anything, they need to stand up and support the will of Americans. So Sluggo, we can touch base. And
well, stay with us for a minute at least. John, come back. I want you to come back on as soon as you can. And I want you to meet, if you don't know him already, Jeff Cohen. Jeff Cohen is one of the great mainstays he founded FAIR and Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and is with Roots Action now. Jeff Cohen meets John Rosenthal, and if you will exchange your contacts, that would be great. We have 63 people with us, but John, I want you to come back as soon as you possibly can.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, right. There you go. And gun violence is now the leading cause of death of American kids under 20, I guess. And
Yep.
you know, it's a nightmare, and it bothers me that we get these reports every day. This shooting here, and it's just become part of the landscape. We don't want that to happen. So, Jeff Cohen, if you'll introduce yourself to John Rosenthal, that would be great. And we're going to proceed. It's really John. Mike Hirsch in the chat has said we've become numb. We can't allow that to happen. So, Jeff, meet John.
Yeah, John, nice to hear from you. You can reach me at jeff@rootsaction.org. I watch Fox News, so you don't have to. And I was watching today during the program Outnumbered, which is on in the early afternoon, 4 women and a man, all right wing, 1 man, all right wing. And they were going on and on about how women have to buy guns. And they were just in, we want to protect our babies. We want to protect our children. And I'm glad I have a gun. And it was McEnany, one of the spokespersons for Trump, who's now a Fox panelist. But they're just selling fear and hatred on that network. And the fear is the main thing, more than hatred. They're selling fear of the border, fear of the invasion from the south of our country, fear of criminals in your suburbs. The idea that you could discuss the reality that violent crime is actually down. It's much higher decades ago than it is now. But they're selling fear. It keeps people tuned in beyond the next commercial. It's a strategy of Fox and the Murdoch family to gain viewership. But it's very, very scary because these people all vote. And, I heard a great distinction made by David Sirota that if you want to, and I watch all the TV channels, all the news channels every day. I even watch Bannon's War Room.
Oh my God.
I watch Charlie Kirk's program.
We're gonna have to treat you for PTSD, Jeff. I mean,
it's bad. I turn it off and watch a comedy when I can't take anymore. But I've said this for decades, and you can take it with a grain of salt. You can't be a real good progressive activist if you aren't tuning into Fox News a little bit, even if it hurts. You have to hear what they're doing and what they're saying and why it's effective and why Trump won in 2016. The difference between Fox on the one hand and MSNBC, CNN on the other hand, New York Times, is that Fox is mobilizing its base. Fox is getting its base angry, mobilized. They're all registered to vote. You got to take action. Whereas if you get your news from MSNBC or CNN, they're not mobilizing, they're anesthetizing. They're telling their viewers it's all in good hands. Leave it to Mueller. Mueller will bring down Trump. Leave it to Pelosi. Leave it to Biden. It's not a mobilization message. It's more stay on the sidelines, be a spectator because the Democratic leadership is delivering for you. Well, I've got an attitude that the Democratic leadership has not been delivering for us. And that's the reason Trump won in the first place in 2016 and the reason he may win again. So it's real. I think it's important for people. I go back and forth between MSNBC and Fox, CNN and Fox, and you realize that Fox is effective television. It's mobilizing, it's angering. And MSNBC is sort of putting their viewers to sleep. We're righteous, we're liberals, we hate the right wing, but it's really not accomplishing much.
Well, let me explain, Jeff Cohen, let me explain a bit about who you are. You're one of the leading national experts, obviously, in the mass media. And you helped form Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting many, many years ago. You are also a producer when Phil Donahue returned, and you had me on as his first guest, and they never aired our segment. Somehow they had a technical difficulty, and I wind up on a lot of cutting room floors, I got to tell you. And you are now a major force in I got to tell you, I watch Fox. I work out at a club around the corner, and they have a seated elliptical, which is good for an old man like me. And I go from Fox to CNN to MSNBC. And my way of relaxing is to cut out periodically to ESPN. So I watch the sports. I watch Stephen A. Smith yelling at people and stuff like that. So that's what keeps me sane and balanced. So I won't say fair and balanced. And it's good you've hooked up with John Rosenthal. John is a master of the media, and he's in Boston. He has done the most effective gun violence advertising that anybody has done. And I did mention last week, we just lost Jerry Mander. That was his real name, by the way, who was the first real master of using getting progressive issues into the major mass media. But you've been a great critic of the mass media, and you and John should be in touch. So definitely. Yeah. And so go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. And I'm glad John didn't have to witness what I witnessed. I've been watching Fox since the beginning. Indeed, I used to be a paid pundit at the beginning of Fox News Channel. I'd never seen anything like it. They're going hysterical. And the neo-fascist tendency at Fox News, don't be deceived that they got rid of Tucker Carlson. That did not in any way signify an ideological change for Fox News. It's very effective television. It's very effective propaganda. They're mobilizing their base. They're not telling people, leave it to the Republican leaders. They will come through for you. It's like, get out there and take over your school board. It's very different than what you get from the media that liberals and progressives watch, corporate media, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, PBS, NPR.
And amazingly, you can subject yourself to Steve Bannon. That's really mind-boggling. I don't think.
I was watching Bannon. Again, if you're not paying attention to these people, you don't understand what the right wing is planning and what they will succeed in when they get power. I think if I had been paying closer attention to Bannon earlier, I would have understood the Ron DeSantis phenomenon earlier. I feel I have a good beat on it now. I spend 2 or 3 months in Florida every winter. And these are really, put aside Trump, who's sort of erratic, crazy, but has this amazing ability to win the loyalty of millions of people. But DeSantis and Bannon, those guys are more strategic. They're sort of like Trump without the idiocy. And I watched Bannon every day during the Kevin McCarthy standoff. And Bannon was running it, and everyone knew it, that Bannon was in touch with the 20 that were resisting rubber stamping Kevin McCarthy until they got more concessions. And then when it got down to 5 or 6, you could watch all 5 or 6 on Bannon's War Room every day as they were checking in with Bannon. So he's like organizing like a neo-fascist takeover. He's still very close with Trump, obviously closer to Trump than DeSantis. But it's fascinating for me to see that a lot of the intellectuals on the right wing now want DeSantis, but they realize they can't do it. You know, that it's going to be impossible. They created this Frankenstein monster named Trump, and now they can't move him off stage on behalf of DeSantis, which is what they would like to do, but they can't. Rupert Murdoch would like to do that, but he can't.
Lynn Fireman has a hand. Lynn is a radio commentator and a regular on our gatherings. Lynn, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, Jeff. I just want to tell you first, I totally admire you for having the stomach, the iron stomach, to listen to that blankety blank. Okay, I can't do it. I become so anxious. It is, I just can't do it. And what I'd like to say, I guess it's not much of a question, but you know, we need to be able to cut into this media monopoly. And that is why they're so after. That's why the CIA is so after Julian Assange, because he cut right into their crap and he placed it out for everybody to see. And so I just wanted to say that and ask you, you know, what you felt about that.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Give me a couple minutes to answer it. When from 2008 to 2018, I was the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media in Ithaca College. So all I did was study and talk about and bring the practitioners to Ithaca to meet my students, practitioners from indie media, non-corporate media. And you are right that Assange cut through it all by just putting the documents of US war crimes online. Yeah. And that's why they hate him. And it should be noted that Joe Biden is prosecuting. Yeah. Obama did not. Obama had the same evidence, and but Biden is trying to extradite this guy who's sick and perhaps dying, who should be freed in Great Britain, trying to extradite him. But in my study of independent media, we've got to understand, my main goal here is to get people to quit watching so much MSNBC, quit listening to so much NPR, and start paying attention to independent media and funding independent media and using your email and social media to promote independent media. And we are in a high point for independent non-corporate media. In the history of our country, there's never been so much availability of non-corporate, independent, journalistically sound, progressive news outlets as there is today. If you put together the audiences of Democracy Now! And The Intercept, and The Lever, and Truth Out, and Common Dreams, and The Young Turks, and add it all together, millions of people for the first time in US history have access every day to anti-corporate, not just non-corporate and journalistically sound, but anti-corporate news outlets. And if you go back in history, the previous high points for independent non-corporate media were during the upsurge of the socialist movement before it was crushed in World War I, when there were socialist newspapers in every major city. There were huge national socialist newspapers of national distribution. And then the other high point was the late 60s, early 70s, when the underground press became the alternative press. But again, that was both times, those were weekly. I.F. Stone's weekly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was a weekly and then a bi-weekly. So what we have now is hour after hour, you can tune in to non-corporate media. So it is my view, and I'll end my monologue here. It's my view that one of the main activities of progressive activists has got to be to spread the word about these independent outlets, whatever the outlets are that you rely on. You should be using your news, your email, your social media to get people to turn off corporate media, and I include MSNBC and NPR and PBS, and turn on independent media and fund independent media with their donations.
And
Yes,
that includes these calls, actually.
Consortium news.
Yes.
I would
Yes,
add
of course.
consortium news to the mix. They are terrific.
Mike
Yes,
Hirsch, you have a hand, Mike? Mike Hirsch?
Yeah, thanks. Great to see you again, Jeff. I always learn a lot from you. I love it when you get agitated and start preaching, because that's when I learn the most. And I wish I could write all of it down. I think you mentioned Pacifica Radio. And right now, a lot of the people on this Zoom, or a few people, are top leaders on trying to free Pacifica from corporate influx. And, it's not, it's no accident that the corporations would love to get those frequencies, and they would love to silence those voices. And Jeff, I really appreciate you saying that we can be the media, we can amplify the sources that are out there. So what we need is a people's media, democratize the media, small d. And I also want to just ask you if you think that Fox says a lot of crap, but some of what they say about the Democrats is accurate, and some of what CNN and MSNBC says about the Republicans is accurate, but they don't ever expose their own side.
That's exactly the problem. It's not journalism. If you watch MSNBC and CNN, they're just cheerleading for Joe Biden and corporate Democrats. And there's never any scrutiny. There's never any self-analysis, self-criticism. It's ridiculous. It's not journalism. When I read The Lever or Common Dreams, of course, they're going to warn about the threat of fascism that's knocking on our door. But I can count on it that it's nonpartisan journalism that's going to look at who's funding which candidates of both parties. It's actual in-depth journalism that you can get from independent media. I've got to say that if I've achieved one thing in life over the last few years and last few decades, it's to get a lot of liberal-minded people or progressive-minded people to tune out corporate media and start getting their news every day. Start your day with Democracy Now!, support podcasts like Harvey's here. The key is I've gotten thousands of people to, I've heard this a lot. God, I used to love Rachel Maddow and watch MSNBC. Now I make sure that I listen to Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez every day. And those people are getting a much clearer picture of what's wrong in our society. It's not that the Democrats are all great and the Republicans are all awful, although Republicans are all awful. But the Democrats are not great. And it's their halfway measures that breeds fascism. It's neoliberal corporatism that breeds fascism. So what I learned from Democracy Now!, what I learned from Common Dreams, what I learned from Truth Out and The Lever and Consortium, and name your favorite, is actual journalism that both parties have problems. One is neo-fascistic, the other is neoliberal. And if we want to defeat neo-fascism, which should be our number one task, we have to save the Democrats from themselves by forcing them to do reforms they would not otherwise do. And if they don't do those reforms, they can't defeat the faux populist right. That's the history of our country in the last 10, 12 years.
I just want to
I want to
go ahead.
mention, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I
Mike.
just wanted to mention that while Assange is being slowly murdered, the mainstream media features people who are literally from the CIA who've been convicted of lying to Congress. And they don't identify them as CIA. They don't identify them as having lied to Congress. They hold them up as some kind of experts, or they have some term for them, security experts, national security consultants or something. What's going on, Jeff?
Yeah, let me make a quick response. I mean, the networks that are loaded up with former CIA officials and former military leaders is CNN and MSNBC. Those people are now paid contributors. Everything they said during Mueller turned out to be wrong. You know, this idea, just rely on Mueller, he's going to bring Trump down. I think those of us that were paying close attention knew that would not happen, and it did not happen. But here's one thing I want to make sure everyone understands and teach it to everyone you know. When you hear on CNN or NPR or PBS, they introduce someone as a retired general or a former assistant secretary of state or a former former deputy defense secretary. They are lying to you. They know it. The people being introduced that way know it. That if you are a retired general or colonel or former CIA high-level official, and you're appearing on all these shows, and you might have been retired 4 years ago, 10 years ago, those people aren't going into retirement. They are all on the boards of corporations. They consult for corporations. They lobby for military industrial corporations. Everyone knows it, but it's a gentleman's agreement between these TV channels and NPR. We will never identify you by what you are doing now, even though that may be more relevant information to our listeners and viewers in weighing what you are saying. We will never tell them what you are doing now. We will only identify you by your former government post, even if it was 4, 6, 10, 12 years ago. So you had this guy getting on CNN all the time in 2019 to bash Bernie Sanders' campaign. His name was Jim Messina, not the singer. He ran one of the Obama campaigns. He was a high-level Obama person, and he would be introduced to bash Bernie Sanders on CNN over and over, and he would be introduced as just a former Obama chief of staff or a former Obama campaign manager. Here's what you weren't told: that Jim Messina, who you're about to hear bashing Bernie Sanders, is now a corporate consultant working for some of the most powerful corporations in the country, including Amazon's pharmaceutical line. And when he quit running Obama's campaigns, he was running the campaigns or consulting on the campaigns of the Tories, the Conservative Party in Great Britain. So you're not told any of that. He's just identified by his last official title as a chief of staff for Obama or deputy chief of staff for Obama. So whenever you hear former or retired, you know they are lying to you. And I would encourage those of you who do listen to NPR or PBS to fire off emails and say, why did you just identify this person by their former title and not tell us who that person is consulting with now, lobbying for now, or what boards they currently sit on, their current entanglements, rather than their former or past title in government.
Very good point. We're talking with Jeff Cohen here. Jeff, your current organization is Roots Action. Is that your primary home? And you're with the great David Swanson and the great Norman Solomon, mainstays of the. I want to tell you, by the way, I want to send you. I've just finished the update of my People's Spiral of U.S. History, which I hope you'll take a look at. Tom Hartman is someone who a lot of us rely on, and we're trying to get him back on Pacifica in KPFK in Los Angeles, where he certainly belongs.
He's back on, Harvey, but only for 1 day a week instead of 5.
Oh, well, he's on 1 day a week. He should be on every day, along with Amy, who should be on at 8 o'clock or a better hour in the morning. That's a struggle we're having, as you well know, Jeff. The Pacifica fight is a big one, but I'm encouraged by what you say about alternative media. I've sensed that, and it's good to know. Mike, is there anything further, Mike Hirsch, that you wanted to jump in with? Otherwise, we'll go to Wendy, Eric, Point Man, and MYLA.
I was just going to say, thanks, Jeff. Hope you can come back again somewhat regularly to update us on how terrible things are and what we can do to make them better.
Sounds good.
Yeah, well, we can have the Monday mass murder report, and then we can also have the Jeff Cohen media report. That would be great. John Rosenthal, you definitely must get in touch with. He's a real
I was very
powerhouse.
impressed. Yeah, very impressed with what I heard.
Jeff, you're being asked for your contacts, so I think somebody wants to take you to dinner.
Yeah, the easiest way is jeff@rootsaction.org.
Roots Action, isn't that like a reggae program? All right, sorry about that. Okay, Wendy Lederman. Wendy, if you'll meet Jeff Cohen here, that'd be great.
Hi, honored. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Jeff Cohen. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. So, yeah, there's a couple of points that you brought up that I think were awesome, but also, I think a lot of what you just said would be great on with Dennis Bernstein, who's doing a lot of fundraising for.
Oh, is Dennis on the call today? Dennis,
he was, but I know at this time he's getting ready for his show, like he's about to go on, but I'm sure he would love to be here and love to talk with you. I also have the contact for Vinny DiStefano, who's the director of the Assange Defense Fund. He's like the national director. He's a friend of the show. So I'll put his contact in the chat, and he's super friendly. So be great to talk to him. A couple of the points you made about just the media, like the idea, the demigods, so they have like the left is worshiping their people blindly, and then the right is worshiping their people blindly, and then the left is not active, right? And the right is like gung-ho. They're just like they're very reactionary. They're very reactionary, ready to go out and vote, ready to organize. But I'm here in DeSantis land and watching it all, and I'm seeing how now there's this bill that just passed that they got a little watered down because there was so much resistance, the immigration bill, where now instead of like driving someone in your car or housing them isn't going to be a felony, but driving them into the state will be. So it's just slightly less fascist. All doctors will have to report undocumented people that come to their emergency room, and companies that hire more than 25 employees, it would be a felony for them to hire anyone undocumented. So this hasn't even gone into effect yet. And all week we've been seeing videos of like empty construction sites, and it's like 9 a.m. and there's like, it's a ghost town. There's 3 white guys, 3 gringos, and nothing's getting done. So I think it's these like little facts that like impact people, that break through that like blood-brain barrier of demigod like worship, that I think, and then I think for the Dems, it's like the insider trading and just getting people, like, even if it's just to get them a little less motivated to go vote, if that's, just to kind of tone down their base. So I'm just wondering, like, some of those little points that you're seeing that can just kind of, like, people can't really argue with. And then someone in the chat, someone else wanted me to ask you about your take on Mueller, because they know that I personally am like, no, he led us into the war, like he's not our friend, and a lot of people seem to still so yeah, thank you so very much. I hope you come back and join us.
Well, I can't resist. Thank you, Wendy, always cogent. I can't resist how much I love it when a guy named Hannity and a guy, all these guys with Irish names are yelling about immigration. Yeah. To me, it's like hilarious. It's like a parody, So there you go. But go ahead, Jeff. Go on.
Yeah. These are all good questions. I mean, the way when you talk to a centrist, they say, well, you got Fox News on the far right and MSNBC on the far left. What we really have is Fox News on the far right and MSNBC in the corporate center. They hate Bernie what Bernie stands for. They lied about the progressive agenda when it mattered in 2019 and 2015, and they're not friends of the left. MSNBC engages in censorship day after day, and everyone knows it. I'll give you just one example that brings it home. For 2 years, Biden had nominated the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is a crucial institution. It's crucial in protecting the internet. It's crucial in regulating media. And Trump's FCC gave the big media corporations, including the owner of MSNBC, Comcast, everything it wanted. And under Trump's FCC, you know, net neutrality, internet, an open internet was ended, but it got tied up in the courts. And the goal of Biden's FCC from day one was to re-sanctify net neutrality, to protect the internet. But the FCC remained deadlocked 2 versus 2 with an empty 5th seat because Biden had nominated a consumer advocate. And for nearly 2 years, the lobbyists from Comcast, and everyone knew it, the lobbyists from Comcast, which owns MSNBC, CNBC, NBC, and the lobbyists for Rupert Murdoch's Fox Corporation were working hand in hand to make sure that Gigi Sohn did not get confirmed. She could not get past the committee. She couldn't get out of committee. And this is the power of the corporations over both political parties. And on MSNBC, the allegedly far left network, you couldn't hear about that corporate exercise of power because it was their own owners. The owners of Comcast are very tight with the leaderships of the Democratic and Republican parties. Obama used to golf with the head of Comcast. Obama had so many fundraisers, and the chief lobbyist of Comcast House, he once quipped, "The only thing I haven't done in this house is have Passover Seder." So when you have these corporations, yeah, I think that happened after they quit. But the fact is that, you know, neoliberalism and the fact that income and wealth is gushing to the top, and working class and middle class people, beleaguered middle class people of all colors, are feeling such anxiety and frustration and anger. It's in that milieu, it's in that world that faux populists, that neo-fascists can rise. And if we're not trying to make the, you know, save the Democratic Party from itself, to do some reforms that'll actually make the lives of working class and beleaguered middle class people, make their lives better, then in 2024, we're looking at a rerun, not of 2020, where Biden narrowly edged Trump, but we're looking at a rerun of 2016, where the Democrats, where young people didn't come out and vote, or they voted third party because they were so alienated from the process. Trust me, when Biden drills in the Gulf, when Biden drills in the Arctic, when Biden promotes liquefied natural gas exporting, young people, whether they're occasional voters or semi-regular voters, that really is almost voter suppression of young voters. And we're going to do our part, even if the candidate is Biden, to defeat Trump or whoever in 2024. But the Democratic leadership is making our job very, very difficult by the things that they're doing and the things that they're not doing. And the latest thing that they're doing is negotiating with Kevin McCarthy to make cuts against poor people in order to get the debt ceiling raised. They should never have begun those negotiations.
Right, and I'll point out also that Biden is pushing nuclear power. And now we've got AOC, of all people, talking about how France reprocesses nuclear waste, which is absolutely false. We hope that they don't buy into AOC and the so-called progressives on nuclear power. There she is, and with a letter from the great Linda Gunter, who I'm sure you know. So there you go. MYLA RESON.
Thanks, Harvey.
Jeff, I don't know if you know MYLA. MYLA is one of the great mainstays of the attempt to save Pacifica. Great activist, and you should be in touch.
In fact, Jeff, I'm going to be leaving this call shortly to join a programming oversight committee meeting for KPFK Los Angeles, which is Pacifica's station in Los Angeles, California. And I'm on the board with Harvey for the local station board. At any rate, what I am wanting to ask you dovetails with what Harvey just mentioned, and that is that I find very troubling that many journalists, so-called journalists that we rely on the left, have been embracing nuclear power as a necessary component to address our climate crisis. We look at the Jacobin magazine, The Nation, a show that airs on KPFK called GREE Zone, the GREE Zone hosted by Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal just recently talked about how terrible it was that the German Green Party advocated for shutting down nuclear power in Germany because they were asserting, the hosts of the GREE Zone, that it was a big mistake because they said that nuclear power was carbon free, and that we had to pick our poison. I know your partner Norman Solomon often says we don't have to pick our poison. We don't have to take nuclear or coal. That isn't the choice. But it just, and then we have great leaders, they're esteemed leaders like Sheldon Whitehouse, who's good on many issues, who's promoting nuclear power. He has a bill before Congress in the Senate right now that would fund a new generation of nuclear power. And it seems to me, I'd really like to know how the left all of a sudden seems to be divided on this issue. And it seems to me that the people who are advocating for nuclear power really are not very well informed, but they have large megaphones, and many of them are trusted and relied upon. So could you comment on that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't think that the left is divided. I think progressives are generally against nuclear power, with the exceptions you've named. The problem is that, the greatest invention of the progressive movement in the last few years was the Green New Deal. Was this idea that not only can we transform our energy and transportation in a direction that saves the planet, but we can provide millions of jobs, union jobs, that can't be exported overseas to slave labor or cheap labor countries. And, Bernie was doing his best with Build Back Better, the full bill, the one that the mainstream media kept telling you is massive and expensive. The full Build Back Better was very, very close to a Green New Deal. And if we're not going to transform our economy toward renewables and retrofitting buildings, imagine all the people that could be put to work just in hospitals and schools alone, making those buildings energy conservative buildings. And so we need to keep harping back on it, that what our society needs is to put the workers that have been laid off, that some of whom used to be coal miners, we need to, from the bottom up, create a new economy where we move toward renewables and conservation and provide millions of jobs. And then this talk of nuclear power as sort of a Hail Mary pass that's going to save us from climate change, what are we going to do with all the waste? I mean, Harvey knows I was at Diablo Canyon trying to stop it from being permitted before they even built the thing. We were at the protests up in San Luis Obispo to try to stop that nuclear plant. Now it's got to be shut down and decommissioned. But yeah, nuclear power is not the answer. The answer is let's move our society in a progressive way that provides jobs and transforms our energy grid and our transportation and retrofits all of these buildings, beginning with hospitals and schools, and then getting down to apartment buildings and homes. That's the way to put people to work. Those jobs cannot be exported. Most of those jobs, by the way, don't lend themselves to AI either. So, I mean, the Green New Deal is really what we need to keep harping on. And I think that's the path forward. It's not nuclear, nuclear power.
You gotta help us make that point to the media, absolutely, because they're and AOC has got to be, somebody's got to get to her before she goes any further with this. John Steiner, Anna, and then Justin. And I know Clint Curtis had a hand. I don't know if he left us or not. Maybe he'll come back. John Steiner, go ahead.
Jeff, thanks for being on. I hope you will come back as often as possible. Two things. One, do you have an article or series of writing somewhere that expresses what you've so beautifully shared about, quote, the left public media, the MSNBCs, and what's going on behind the scenes?
I think I did a recent speech in Gainesville, Florida, that's now part of alternative radio. Are you familiar with David Barsamian's alternative radio?
Sure.
I
live in Boulder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, get the transcript of it. It was a coherent, here's what's wrong with the mainstream media. Here's my deep experience inside cable news and what I witnessed in terms of censorship. And here is the alternative. I think, and I did talk about how if you hear the NPR or PBS or NBC News calling someone former, your antenna should go up that you're being misled. It's all in that, like a 45, 50-minute speech on David Barsamian from a few months ago.
Wendy or Harvey, could you get that for us and make it available? And number two,
Wendy, we'll do it. Jeff, you have my email, Jeff, don't you?
Yes.
Solartopia.
I don't have the transcript, but someone can pay $5 and get it, or $10.
And then Harvey, I just wondered, can we get a recording today, a standalone recording of just everything Jeff has said to us?
Well, Steve Caruso, if you can do that for us, that'd be great. Steve,
because this has been
our engineer. We have done that before. And,
I mean, we all know a lot of this stuff, but it's still such an education, and such an education that so many people who aren't on this call need to know about.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Because yours, it is a mobilizing presentation.
Yeah, I ask people who I know are watching MSNBC night after night, do you know who owns it? And they don't.
No.
They don't know that Comcast is one of these corporate giants. The head of Comcast, Brian Roberts, he's an oligarch. And if you watched MSNBC from 2016 to 2020, all they ever talked about was how these oligarchs are interfering with US democracy, but they were Russian oligarchs. Trust me, the US oligarchs, like the guy who owns Comcast and the Rupert Murdochs, those people have damaged US democracy far more than any Russian oligarch, but you can't hear the word US oligarch on MSNBC because they're owned by one.
So let me just one follow-up question, Harvey, and then move on. So you again are mentioning that we really are in a kind of golden age of independent media. And has there been an effort among all the groups you've mentioned today, plus others, to somehow do a mobilization of those groups in some way that's already a force, but it's not aware of itself?
Yeah, there used to be what were called National Conference on Media Reform. And that's where all the independent media leaders and activists would gather. And the great, the beloved Bill Moyers would fund a lot of that.
Right.
We haven't had that lately, but I do want to assure you that the leadership of independent media outlets, they're in touch with each other. They're trying to collaborate more and more. I watch the Real News Network a lot. How many people are familiar with that? It's a great video. They're trying to collaborate now with Free Speech TV, and others are trying to do collaborations with truthout.org. I'm finding greater collaboration going on. The Lever and Jacobin collaborate. I did not know about Jacobin having a writer pushing nuclear power. I missed that. But there is more collaboration among progressive news outlets than I can remember.
But Jeff, isn't that more of a collaboration on news itself and not organizing? Because these groups aren't set up to be organizers. They're not set up to create a grassroots mobilization based on their viewers. It's not their role particularly. So we could continue this another time.
Yeah, indeed. Many of them are C3s and they can't do electioneering.
Exactly.
But I've got to say that there's two outlets, commondreams.org and truthout.org. We notified them we're starting this new thing, Norman Solomon and I, rootsaction.org, where we're going to be just orienting toward people in your base and trying to give them a way to be active every day. And truthout.org and commondreams.org have been very good in making sure that their readers knew what activism we were doing and many other activist groups were doing. So the better news outlets are, and the Lever does this every week, the levernews.com. They have a weekly that says stuff that makes us happy, something like that. And it's good activism that happened that week. If you're a independent news outlet and you're not featuring those who are trying to make democracy real, you're not doing your job. I know you're doing that on your podcast.
So Jeff, you've mentioned that Norman Solomon has a book come out. You can tell him we'll give him an hour if he wants. And, we'll proceed with that. And as I say, I will send you my history of the U.S. John, anything else from John Steiner? Always good to hear from you. Anna Georgie, my old buddy from Western Mass, the author of the original No Nukes, Old Testament. Anna, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Are you unmuted? Hold on here. Let's get you unmuted. No, we can't hear you yet. There you go.
There.
Okay.
Yeah. Everyone's Guide to Nuclear Power. Jeff, I met you through your alternative radio presentation, and I really recommend it to people. Just go to alternative radio. You can download it for a PDF for $3, and they need the support. They give some stuff away free, but they have an amazing archive, and Aaron Hadi Roy was on last week, and they come for me on WAMC in New York right after this program. They come on at 8 o'clock on the East Coast. So I really recommend it. The second thing I wanted to say about the whole getting the word about, the lies about nuclear power and all, there's a group of old clamshell activists that have been meeting for some time, and over the last 4 or 5 months have worked up a new, a whole statement on nuclear power and alternatives that is really good, and it will be on a new website. And we really need your help to get this out because it's in kind of plain language, and we'd like to do media outreach to the local press and communities that had some of the thousands of people opposing nuclear power, and now their children and grandchildren don't know anything about that. We'd like to reach groups like Sunrise and solar energy and Green New Deal groups that just don't really know about the costs and it's just, there's no future in nuclear, but there's a lot of money, and we all know that PR being thrown there. So Sluggo will be able to, I
Yeah.
hope, distribute that over this this show, because it's a natural for folks. I think we're waiting for the website to be up because it'll refer back
Right.
to the website.
And the clamshell is the only organization on the left where the average member is too old for AARP. So,
Wait, by the way, one of my favorite news outlets is commondreams.org. And it was founded by Craig Brown, who was he did media outreach for clamshell.
Yeah.
They're all over, and there's still so many are still doing it. It's in different ways. Great solar experts. So I'm with you on Green New Deal, and I got your address, and bravo.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
And
there's no
Anna, I don't know
future
what
in-
happened. I thought Roy Morrison was going to be on today, but I guess we missed him. We'll have him next week.
Well,
That is a-
he's on email, he's part of this process, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Clamshell Alliance, of course, was the group that did the mass demonstrations at the Seabrook nuclear plant in the 1970s. Or was it the 1870s? I'm not sure, but anyway, so we're still with it, as Carl Grossman and so many others on this call. Justin, and then Alfred. Justin LeBlanc, and then Alfred Meyer.
Sure. I'd like to make the point that a lot of the U.S. oligarchs are also foreign investment. That people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel both have families that have foreign minds. And of course, they're taking over Twitter. They're cutting out Gawker. They're actually trying to sabotage even all the independent media as well. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up is there are bills going through multiple states right now to try to end foreign influence in elections, period. No PACs, no contributions to council seats, all these sorts of things. And so keep your eye out for all those. Jamie Raskin is actually one of those champions for the federal level, HR 6583. But it's happening in a lot of states as well. Minnesota just passed one. Michigan is on the track. Maine is on the track. Massachusetts is on the track. California is on the track. So we're building steam.
Yeah. And
Great.
Jeff will definitely have you back along with Norman. I always try to get David Swanson, but he's taking care of his kids at these hours. I can never get him on.
Yeah,
So,
you're gonna have to wait. His kids are away in college because he works so many hours for the peace and justice movements, but there's these few hours he has for his kids, and it's this time of day.
Right. Alfred Meyer. Alfred.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jeff for his very insightful comments, in particular about not only the ownership of MSNBC and CNN, but the net effect of it making you sapped of energy and not organizing. And I think this is a crucial thing, that the experience of watching those hours of blather go by, you just sink farther in the couch, you don't get up and do something. I experienced this in 1992. I was working with the Jerry Brown campaign. And back in those years, before email and internet and all that stuff, the Republican Party was vastly more organized and disciplined and engaged than were the progressive Democrats. So this has been a long-term problem. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yes,
Yeah,
and I
thanks
will
for
point
that.
out and this is at the conclusion of my People's Spiral of U.S. History, that the electorate in this country now, the majority are born after 1980 or 81, which means they're millennials and Zoomers. We also have a majority of women, and people of color are about to become a majority. So, the time and the numbers are on our side. I also want to point out one thing, by the way. They're starting to yell that a majority of the American public supports nuclear power, which is, kind of BS. But the reality is that a majority of women still oppose nuclear power. There is a clear gender divide on public opinion on nuclear power, and women are still opposed. And that's why I want to reiterate, Jeff, I don't know if you need to know about this film if you don't already. Carl has seen it and reviewed it for Counterpunch. It's called Radioactive: The Women of 3 Mile Island. And as you may know, Anna Mayo and I were, I think, two of the only reporters that went into central Pennsylvania after the accident at TMI and interviewed people and actually talked to people who were suffering. And Carl has seen this film. It's with one of his nearby colleagues. And you at FAIR, you and Norman definitely should see and review this film because it's
Yeah, I
very.
want to see it. I think let me make this final point before I exit. It's so important, Harvey, that you brought up the generational divide, because young voters are the most progressive generations in our country. They're the most anti-racist, the most anti-sexist, the least homophobic, the most who want to transition toward a Green New Deal type future. Every poll shows this. The right wing, it scares the hell out of them that when these mainstream pollsters say, do you have a more favorable or unfavorable view of socialism? More people under 40, under 45 have a more favorable view of socialism than an unfavorable view. What do they mean by socialism? They mean Bernie Sanders, AOC, you know, the social democratic reforms he stands for. So what kills me, and we played this role in 2016 and 2020, trying to get young people out to vote Democratic to prevent the fascists from winning the election. It's going to be harder and harder to do that if Biden keeps moving in this direction that he's moving in, which is to compromise with the corporate elite and to compromise with the Republican Party elite. It's just going to be more and more difficult to get young voters to see that they have to hold their nose and vote for Biden to prevent fascism. You know, it's a hard sell, but they are the future if we can somehow deal with climate, because young voters, unlike baby boomers, and I'm one of them, you know, baby boomers on these big poll questions have become pretty reactionary in general. And people under 30, under 40 are progressive on every issue, even on the issue of, well, I'll read you one from a right-wing poll. Do you agree, quote, the country would be better off if our political and economic systems were more socialist? This was done in 2019 for people that were under the age of 45. 53%, and this includes Democrats, Republicans, Independent, 53% versus 40% said, yes, we agree that it would be good if our political and economic systems were more socialist. That's become even more profound through Bernie's 2020 run, and, you know, where Fox News and Bannon, anything good in society, anyone who stands up for trans people, anyone who stands up against racism, they're called socialists. You know, I think among young people that has raised the bar. I mean, they've made it a bit easier for people to say, yeah, I'm for socialism, which in this country, when young people say they're for socialism, that doesn't mean they're for the old, you know, repressive Stalinist Soviet Union. It means we're for a new kind of society, more like Bernie Sanders envisions. So if we can prevent—
It's really social democracy.
Yeah, social democracy. If we can prevent the Democratic leadership from suppressing the youth vote, we can defeat fascism in 2024, but it's a long way off. And Biden and his team are moving in the wrong direction, I believe.
Thank you, Jeff Cohen.
That's why we set up this campaign, don'trunjoe.org. We're changing our name to Step Aside Joe. We still have hopes that there will be an open process in 2023-24 that Biden will decide for the good of his family or his health, he should step aside. Remember, 20 Democrats or more were running for president in 2019. So many, they had to have debates on 2 different nights. But at the end of that open process, people felt better about the process and they were able to unify behind Biden and defeat Trump. If there isn't that kind of process and it's just Biden is sort of foisted upon us, and he's moving more and more to the right, and he's doing all these anti-climate things, he's going to help Trump become the next president.
God help us. Lynn Fireman, and anybody else wants to speak, raise your hand now, because it's after 7. And
yeah, I've only got 5 more minutes.
Okay, Lynn, go ahead, and then we'll sign off.
Okay, so Jeff, I just want to say, step aside for who?
Yeah, who's the alternative?
Our goal from the beginning has been to encourage, and we got a lot of mainstream media attention, just encourage Biden to step aside. That's the goal. Once that happens, Ro Khanna is going to get into it. Gavin Newsom's going to get into it. Kamala Harris will be into it. That open process where there's a debate allows the base of the party to have more influence, because the base of the party is important in these statewide elections. So the open process, I think, will lead to something much better than Joe Biden.
Well, I'll be supporting either Magic Johnson or Steph Curry. So we'll have to see about that. Steve Kaiser, and then we're going to be done. Jeff,
that was my question. Also, step aside for who? And you got to have somebody in place that can draw a lot of strength in order to be a substitute for a sitting president. And the 3 choices that you mentioned, they have their strong qualities, but I don't think that's enough. I wouldn't want to look to them to be the president. And I don't know what to expect from Biden if he would stumble through to another term at this point, or what all these revelations about his activity in the Ukraine really throw enough dirt on his campaign to make him want to step aside. But we got some alternatives out there. I think there's a half a dozen senators worth considering, and maybe a few governors. So, I mean, there are people we can be talking about, and I think it's time to start talking.
Well, we'll be dealing at some point in the future also with Marianne Williamson. She was going to come on Memorial Day, but we're going to postpone because it's not right to do it on Memorial Day. But thank you,
She's always
Steve.
a joy, but I don't know if she'll be president.
And then there's Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is actually pretty serious. I just had a talk with Dennis Kucinich, who is working with Bobby, so we'll see how that goes as well. Jeff Cohen, you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd prefer an open process where someone with government experience or leadership experience of social justice movements gets into the race. A full debate would be good. The progressive base of the community, especially young people who care about climate, would be heard more if there was an open process. Because right now, Joe Biden isn't listening to young people who care about climate. Every decision he's made recently has been a wrong one. So that's why we want to open the process beyond Marianne Williamson, Joe Biden, and RFK Jr.
Okay, everybody, we will meet next week. Jeff, you can tell Norman he's welcome on, and we need your help at Pacifica, and I'll talk to you about that separately. Wendy, great to see you. Jeffrey Barkdale, thank you. Steve Caruso, our engineer, the usual great job. Thank you so much. Mike Hirsch, thanks for inviting Jeff on. We will be back again next week and then off the week after. But this is a great crew. Jeff, after 2 hours, we still have 44 people. I couldn't do that as a college professor. So
thanks, Harv.
See
Thanks,
everybody.
Mike Hirsch. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Jeffrey, we'll get to you at the beginning next week. No nukes, everybody, and we'll see you in Solartopia.
Thanks, everybody. Great job, Sluggo.
Thank you, guys. No nukes. Bye-bye.
No nukes. John Steiner, I sent that chat to you, or the transcript, but I'll send it in email. Go get it. Peace out.
Ron Leonard, good to see you, everybody. Lynn Fireman, thank you. I'm always exhausted after these calls. I have to go jump in a hot tub.
Have trouble walking. I stagger off the battlefield. And Jeffrey Barkdale, when I ask you to ask me what the question is, tell me what your question is, just let me know. If you don't have a question that you can ask me, then you don't have a question, and we don't have time for you to just kind of extemporaneously make it up on the fly.
All right, great. And Mike, thank you again for riding herd here. Jeffrey, we'll see you next week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And good luck, everybody. Take care. And
Peace and no